So I could start in if you're ready.
I am, sir.
You might have the questions in front of you and you may have already thought about them, but I will read them aloud and ask you anyways. So you started out as a comic. What was that like, and or how did that happen, and how did you end up working for the city?
Well, good question. Not to make too fine a point of it, more of the variety arts. We did some stand-up comedy, sketch comedy, but we were involved with what at the time was called, and probably still is called, the new vaudeville movement. San Francisco Mime Troupe, groups like that made some national headway, and we were certainly part of a wave of new vaudeville here. So again, not to be too cute about it, but the difference between a comic and a comedian, of course, is that a comic says things funny and a comedian says funny things. So I will own to being a comic at times when we were on, say, a comedy club stage, but we did a lot of contemporary commedia dell'arte kind of things, circus skills, storytelling, and a lot of things. And that grew out of my time that I had spent in the co-ops. I had a hand in getting the sort of modern era of the food co-ops started here in the 70s. And I happened to work with a couple of fellows that had different circus skills, actually juggling, mime, that sort of thing. And I started out as a musician, but the three of us put a group together called Sideshow. And we bridged a lot of gaps there. But I had an abiding interest from my co-op days with social change, even going back to high school with the peace movements and a lot of the social issues of the 60s and the 70s. So when I saw a little blurb in the local newspaper, the Star Tribune, that they were looking for volunteers for the Minneapolis Arts Commission, I put my name in, and a name that might be familiar to you, Van White, who was a council member from the North Side.
Oh, yes, sure.
Took my name and proposed my membership in the Arts Commission. And essentially one thing led to another. And when the city of Minneapolis decided to follow St. Paul's lead in having a specialist deal with the arts, I put my name in that and was fortunate enough to be hired as the city of Minneapolis's Arts Economic Development Specialist. And then that led to a panic call that you and I may get into a little bit later, when the host of the fledgling Artifacts show didn't show up one day for the program, and guests were showing up. A woman over at the Office of Telecommunication, Edie French, a name that might or might not be familiar to you. She had known me in my performing days and literally with a half hour's notice said, "Can you get over here and host a show?" And so I was pinch hitting, and then things developed from there when it was clear that the woman who had kind of come up with the original idea for a show about the arts, her notion was visiting performers and local notables. But my instincts were much more grassroots and if you will, broader than that. I think it started out as a half-hour program dealing mostly with performing artists, as I remember. But when I got involved, I wanted to broaden that to all the arts disciplines. And I included architecture and even some of the design elements to the arts, the larger arts world. So that's kind of how I got involved with the show itself. I then pushed it to an hour-long format instead of a half hour, and basically thought of my purview as the arts in the Minneapolis area. There are aspects of the arts that affected us in Minneapolis that were outside the city limits, and conversely, a lot of what was going on in Minneapolis arts spilled over into local and regional and to some degree even national venues. So I kind of hedged a little bit and said, well, we cover the arts in the Minneapolis area, but of course Minneapolis was our home base.
Was this the first TV program you'd ever been involved in producing or in performing, acting, however you want to describe it?
The short answer is no. I kind of put a hand in a few video projects. There was the founding curator of the photography department at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. He was gracious enough to join me and another woman in a pilot that never took off that we were going to deal with the arts. So I'd had my hand in, and I kind of grew up in journalism, starting out in high school, and later on helped with some underground newspapers, had done some radio reporting. So I had kind of a journalism and an arts background. So it was a pretty good fit for doing a show about the arts.
So when you were called in at that last minute to host this show, you were not uncomfortable being plopped in front of a camera, or it's not like you didn't know what to do or anything like that. So
correct. I'd interviewed people before, not so much for television, but I'd interviewed people as a reporter, as kind of a gadfly, if you will. And so I was comfortable in front of cameras, although our performing that new vaudeville that I talked about, it was live audiences.
Okay. And whose idea was Artifacts? You said that the show was already in the works, and then you were asked to step in because the host didn't show.
I'm forgetting her name right offhand. Well, I think she was the wife of one of the then sitting Arts Commission members.
Okay.
And I thought it was a great idea. I was very supportive of the notion, and it was fine. But as I say, I had a different take on the beat, if you will. A little broader, maybe a little deeper, if you will. And I have, to this day, I have no idea what happened that she didn't follow through. But when I developed it, I had a pretty clear vision of what to do. I use the word, and it's a little inflated, but kind of curating the content. I tried to be very diverse, both in terms of the arts disciplines and the guests that would show up. And we also tried very hard to get out on location as often as we could. We maybe saw some of that in the actual show.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems you did even more of that in your later productions, like Inside Minneapolis and On Cue. Lots of those were on site, as I recall. We'll talk about those a little later.
Yeah, okay, fair enough, yeah.
You worked with Janet Zahn for a while, then she left for another job in the private sector. How was it working with a partner? Was it easier, more difficult, or just different from working solo after she left?
It was very seamless. It was great working with Janet. I enjoyed Janet. She knew her stuff. A little bit of history. I believe she had inherited a program called Sound Image that had been started by the then Minneapolis Office of Film, Video, and Recording. Its first staff person there was Randy Adamsick, who went on to great things nationally. And she came in after him as the head of that office. But because that show existed, I chose not to duplicate those beats of film, video, and recording. So my shows covered almost everything else. But for one reason or another, and you'd have to ask Janet why she stopped producing Sound Image, when she did that, I thought, well, either I should cover those topics, or I would like to maybe invite Janet to come in and do one segment in the hour-long program so that the beats would be covered. Again, I was acting as an editor more than as an interviewer at that point, and she was happy to do it, and she produced great segments dealing with film, video, and recording. Once in a while, we'd double up if there was an overlap of interest or topic, but by and large, she did a segment each show every month on some aspect of film, video, or recording industries. And then you're right, she did leave the city for employment elsewhere. And it was at that point that I kind of took up the slack a little bit.
Okay. How much freedom, how much control did you have in creating your programs? For example, like deciding which guests to invite, or what themes to emphasize, or what points to make, that kind of thing?
I was very pleased to have complete control. I never had any interference whatsoever until, and I know we're going to talk later about Inside Minneapolis and On Cue. There was a little bit of finagling right at the end by some folks from other departments who wanted to say. But in terms of Artifacts, I never once had anybody looking over my shoulder, vetoing anything. Once in a while, I get suggestions for some good coverage, and I absolutely made use of people's expertise to fill my research. So yes, lots of project managers, higher management, or whatever. up to and including mayors and sitting council members.
So it was up to you to like reach out to the artists or the organizations that you were going to interview and say, hey, do you want to be on the show? That kind of thing. And it sounds like it could have been a lot of work. I mean, we have all of your program notes, which are substantial. Did that take up a lot of or all of your time? I mean, it just sounds like it was a lot of work.
It was the other half.
Fairly time consuming.
It was the other half of the effort. In other words, the production, the producing. Sometimes things were very topical. Maybe there might be a new development, or I was recently reminiscing with someone you know, Joan Matthew, about the renovation of the Orpheum Theater, for instance. And that was very topical back in '93. So sometimes things of the moment would suggest themselves to me. Otherwise, if something seemed underreported or very interesting, I would reach out. But that was half of it. I would spend a week or so inviting people to be a guest. And then there was lining up locations. That was another aspect that required the help of the production staff at City Cable 13. I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember the number. But yeah, and then I had the great assistance of a woman who was a colleague of mine at the MCDA, Sherry Nolan. She had a background in theater, and she helped line up locations and just sort of the accoutrement to putting on a good story, especially if we were out in the field. She was an associate producer, if you will.
Speaking of Sherry, is there, do you have any general observations about the production staff that you worked in? Anyone you want to call out specifically, or anything that was particularly notable about it? Anything you wish to share?
Question. That's a great and wonderful question. The first director was Edie French, the woman who gave me the panic call about somebody not showing up and the guests arriving. So Edie French, you're catching me a little flat-footed. John, I can't remember his last name, worked with him for even more years than Edie. There were camera operators, Miss Brown. I wish I had all the names at hand, but it's been a third of a century since I did this. So Kim Brown, excellent camera operator for one of our shows, and I don't think it was an Artifact show. She was up on the roof of a high-rise building getting footage from literally hanging over the roof of this high-rise apartment building. She was intrepid. She knew her stuff, as did John and Edie.
You know, while we're talking, Phil, I am going to try to pull up the metadata for the videos, and because that should have the names of these people in it.
Well, I'm so
and maybe that'll answer some of the questions here. If you'll just pause for a second here.
John Harrison, that's who I'm trying to remember. I worked with John for,
that sounds right,
the better part of 10 years. Every single person that I worked with over at City Cable 34, I misspoke a minute ago, City Cable 34, they knew their stuff. They were good at what they did. And the city was fortunate to have these people doing not only my show, but so many other shows for the city.
Names we have, well, Edie French, obviously, Brad Dillman, Ross Downwood, Matt Williams, Kim Lawler, Chet Harrison, Rebecca Bachman.
Yeah,
do any of those names?
Some of these were perhaps interns who sort of came and went on a short term, but people like John Harrison, Edie, Kim, they were there for the duration. This might be a good point to make a point.
Maliko Suzuki. Anyways, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad you have such easy access to that. I'll have to go on the website sometime and refresh my memory. You're probably aware of this, but most people aren't. When I would describe the show that I was producing and hosting, people say, "Oh, a cable access show," and it's important. Edie taught me this. There's an acronym in the local cable world, PEG. P for public access, and indeed that's what most people think of. Citizens having the ability to produce and put on a show that gets broadcast. at least municipally, maybe regionally. But then the E in PEG stands for education. And I think to this day, the Minneapolis Public Schools have a public channel of their own. And then the platform that we were on was the government cable station, which does city council meetings and heritage preservation meetings and things like that. So it's a fine point again, and I know it's all sort of kind of inside baseball, but it's important to remember what Artifacts, Inside Minneapolis, On Cue were not cable access shows. We had professional staff going back to Edie and John and Kim. These were folks that were very good at what they did.
Yes, the show certainly didn't have a, rough-hewn or unprofessional appearance to it. So I'm not surprised to hear you say that.
I was responsible mainly for what was in front of the camera. All those folks that you were listing had to do with what's behind the camera. The editing, although we always went live to tape, but sometimes things would be edited in to illustrate things.
Did the city have other cable shows like Artifacts?
That's a good question, and I thought a little bit about that, not on a specific topic that I can remember, but the city certainly had numerous shows, mainly dealing with public meetings, council meetings, heritage preservation, etc. But Kent Robbins, another name you may be familiar with, he had a well appreciated show about the city council. That was on for many years.
So, but those were more just programs about like somebody turns the camera on and films a meeting, or it records the meeting, that sort of thing, or.
By and large, yes. But with Kent's show, he also, as I did, he had guests, and
okay.
he was a senior staffer in the council side of Minneapolis government, and he knew his stuff and he knew how to interview. He had a great show. So in format, somewhat similar to Artifacts, but in topic, very different.
Well, I've kind of asked a little bit about the production staff, but what was the work environment like? Did you feel well supported? Did you sometimes wish you had more support, not necessarily from the production staff, but also just from the higher ups in the city? And, did you get the sense that what you were doing was really supported throughout the organization?
Well, again, a couple of names that you may be familiar with. Keith Ford, for instance, who had different positions in senior management at the MCD. He was very supportive, but almost more as a cheerleader. He was not micromanaging what I was doing. He would sometimes stop by my office after a show had, I don't want to say aired because it was on cable, but it had run the night before, and he would stand there sometimes and say, "Damn you, it was so good I couldn't go to bed early enough." So he loved it. One of the project managers named Patrick Conoy, similarly supportive, made suggestions from guests, but also including sometimes format notions. But none of it was top down.
Okay.
Otherwise, it was pretty much benign neglect, which I took and ran with.
Okay. Well, apart from Keith Ford, did you have other cheerleaders out there? Did you get attaboys? Both in and outside the city?
Well, to some degree from the arts community, if you will. And I'll take this opportunity to stand on a soapbox for a second. Whenever I hear the word community tagged along with any particular industry, I usually think of community really meaning special interest. So yes, from the arts community, some people really appreciated the fact that all these disciplines were being discussed and presented and hopefully illustrated. There were folks over in St. Paul that appreciated the nature of the show. And I'm talking about more the municipality, if you will. There was always kind of a friendly competition between what Minneapolis was doing and St. Paul was doing to support the arts. I mentioned at the beginning that St. Paul had really taken the lead with focusing on arts development prior to the city of Minneapolis picking up the notion of it. So that would be an example of kind of the give and forth. Ted Hartwell was the curator at the Institute of Arts that had graced a prototype show I had done some years before about the arts. He set up the photo department at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. That show that we produced with him, which really ended up, sadly, not really going anywhere, but that was over in St. Paul. So I had grown up in St. Paul, sidled over to Minneapolis in my 20s. And so I had kind of a nice link to both bureaucracies, both cities.
Good. I asked you a little earlier about that it was up to you to actually find your guests for your program, but did you also get requests to be on your show?
The short answer is yes. There are always some folks that had a new theater to promote, if you will, or a new show that might be up, or just something happening in their world. And I tried not to be too receptive to the flack calls, but if I thought it was a meaningful addition to the narrative that I was trying to put out, sure, I was open to suggestions, but it had to fit into the texture of the show that I was producing at the time. I tried not to overlap two topics in the same monthly program.
All right. And since we're talking about guests, is that inevitable question, who are your favorite guests or features?
Well, my favorite feature, and I noted that you were going to ask this question, I loved covering the various arts districts in Minneapolis, some of which were formally announced, like the West Bank Theater District. But at one point, and speaking as an arts economic development specialist myself, I identified about half a dozen parts of Minneapolis that were either formal arts districts or burgeoning arts districts. Certainly Northeast Minneapolis has had a run of arts, broadly speaking. We treated Lyndale Avenue South as an arts corridor, for instance. And you'll see some of this reflected in the location shows that we did. So that was really a great favorite of mine. I'm hesitant to pick out any person at the exclusion of others, although there might be a few notables who have passed. Dudley Riggs was a guest. I had known him both professionally and a little bit socially, and he was a fine guest. Joan Mondale was a very gracious guest. She not only agreed to come on the show and talk about the arts, you know, she was known as Joan of Art, was one of her monikers, but she was also a fairly proficient ceramicist, potter. And without even asking her, she brought a couple of her own pieces, and we got into the minutia of pottery and all this and that, and a little bit, as I recall, you may have a better ken on this than I do, but she talked a little bit about her experience in Japan when Walter was ambassador over there. So they stand out as favorites. I have some notes here. I don't want to miss anything here. Oh, I enjoyed the intersection. This is what drove me in the first place to putting my hand in for the Arts Commission, was that intersection of art and politics. And so for me to have either sitting mayors on there, or during an election year to have candidates for mayor, because I wanted to get them on the record about their support for the arts. I love doing that. And I was fortunate enough through one of his local aides to get Martin Sable on while he was still, you know, a congressperson. And, you know, it was good to talk with Martin Sable. We traded jokes. We talked about a little the minutia of being in the majority or the minority of a House committee. And he, through his staff more, I think, than on a personal level, was quite supportive of the arts. So they stand out, some of those folks.
I was interested to notice, I was reminded that Steve Kramer was once a city council member. I'd forgotten about that. You know, he's been the downtown council person for decades now, it seems. So
yeah, I just saw him.
He was in one of your segments.
Yeah, he was at the time candidate for mayor. And I enjoyed talking with Steve. He's a good guy.
Yeah. Well, since you were kind of reluctant to talk about particular favorites, maybe you won't want to speak to ones if you have any. I won't ask you if any particular guest presented challenges for you. Maybe I should just ask more broadly. Were there any particular episodes or themes or topics or whatever that just presented difficulties for you, either because of the way things went with the interview, or just maybe putting things together for the program that you recall? Any difficulties or challenges?
Well, in the broad stroke that you're describing with artifacts, I can't remember anything that was that difficult. I will tell an anecdote on myself with one particular guest. I won't mention a name, but we were covering part of the municipal effort with public art. Let's just put it that way. And I had two guests on from one of the branch divisions of Minneapolis government. Again, I won't be specific. And one of the fellows had clearly been assigned by a superior to be a guest and didn't want to be on the show. And he just clammed up. He gave me one-word answers. He hesitated. He grew very silent. And to my own personal amusement, I found myself sitting, this is a location show, and I found myself sitting on a stool in one of the Minneapolis libraries, Washburn libraries it happens, sitting with this guy, and I remember the internal dialogue. This kind of harked back to my performing days. I thought to myself, if he's not going to talk, I can wait him out. And then it struck me, I can't do that. I'm the host. So that was kind of a funny little experience there. And I had, because there are different skills as you're doing right now, but interviewing somebody is a lot of give and a little bit of take. And I had to sort of modulate my approach with this particular fellow to get him more comfortable to coming out of his shell. He wasn't a bad guy. He just didn't want to be interviewed. So, one has to, on a particular case, either encourage, and in some cases, try and encourage people to pull back a little bit. I had a few folks, and again, I won't name names because they were a little difficult, who wanted to control every single word that was uttered in the interview. They would come with a checklist of points they wanted to make, and they really weren't responsive to my questions. And so there wasn't much room for me to go with a flow of conversation. But you learn to deal with that as well and give people time. Interesting, some of the people in the theater world don't really like to be captured in a medium like film or video or television. They're all about live performance. I had some people very politely said, I'd really rather not. My art is in live, it's ephemeral. It's live in front of an audience, and that's it. And some of the very, very accomplished actors once in a while would freeze up in front of a camera, and I would have to be very simpatico with them, as it were. And it helped that I had a performing background because I could kind of tell where they were coming from.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
This is another one that could be a little bit difficult, and you've kind of alluded to this already, but what was your relationship with management, your bosses, as it were, and did expectations change over time, either just because of the way the show evolved or maybe because of changes in who management was?
Well, not to be too flippant, but the short answer is no. There was never any interference. To the degree that there was any real contact, it was enthusiasm. If they could be, but one thing they did sort of in the latter part of the run of Artifacts was agree to free up 2 and sometimes 3 of my colleagues at the Minneapolis Community Development Agency to assist. I mentioned Sherry Nolan. There were others who might do some location scouting for us or some guest accommodations. We didn't really have green rooms, but there was some care and feeding of guests as they were waiting to be the next interviewee. So the MCDA management, to the degree that they said, oh yeah, if you need her for 10 hours a week or something, or 10 hours a month, more like it, that'd be fine. So they were supportive. 80–90% of management were busy with other things, and I was barely a blip on anybody's radar other than those who were supportive.
Well, it sounds like it was a really good gig. What ultimately brought the show to a close?
Well, this is where we get into some minefields. Basically, when I left city employment, and that's a whole nother story as to why I left city employment. But leaving the city, I no longer had the imprimatur of the city, nor legitimate immediate access to the studio or anything like that. Very understandable. I mean, I was not an employee anymore. Now,
so you
The other shows that you mentioned, which I guess we can talk about later, Inside Minneapolis and On Cue, those are done by me as a volunteer. I was no longer employed at the city, but I was a member of CUE, the Committee on Urban Environment. And given my background with the development agency Inside Minneapolis, which dealt with municipal development issues, the contacts were there. There was people had seen artifacts and knew that we could do a good job explaining some of the development projects and nuances. So that was after I left the city, but artifacts ended when I ended my employment.
Okay. These programs today offer an amazing overview of the wide variety of activities in all branches of the arts in Minneapolis during the 1990s. Apart from historic interest, which is important? What else do you think, or what else is important? What else do you think viewers today can draw from these programs?
Well, one of them would be overt, and that's just the diversity. You alluded to it very early in our conversation. We have such a range and depth in Minneapolis and, of course, in the Metro Twin Cities, and by extension, Minnesota, just a range of all the arts disciplines. And when I talk about depth, I mean not only the folks that are making the art, whether it's on stage or on a canvas or what have you, but most of the arts disciplines, certainly when I was doing artifacts, had support organizations, the Minnesota Dance Alliance, the Storytellers Alliance, different things like that. So there was this wonderful depth to the cultural milieu. And I found that very impressive. It was great to cover this. And so I tried to cover not only the disciplines, but some of the support organizations and what was going on. More broadly, less overt, that I think people might be able to tell by watching the programs that you've curated here. There was a moment back in the 1990s where Minneapolis could have stepped up to be on a national level in terms of the vitality of the arts. We had not only the vitality of the arts disciplines I just mentioned, we had the political connection, we had arts education connection, we had funders, we had all the ingredients to make Minneapolis rival anywhere you could think of. San Francisco. We would have outclassed Chicago, in my professional opinion. Chicago's got a great art scene, but we would have, maybe just by scale, we would have outshined anything in the Midwest, certainly anything better than my friends down in Kansas City or wherever. We had a moment, both at the local and certainly at the state level, of support politically. Some people might be able to read between the lines and say, geez, it was so vital. What was the next step? And it was an opportunity missed.
What do you think happened? What went wrong?
Again, minefields here, sir, but basically political bailiwicks. I won't go into cases on this record anyhow. If I ever write my back pages in a book, I might name names. But it showed me how difficult it is to elevate anything, whether it's the high-tech industry, agriculture, you name it, to go beyond the first level of production into kind of a meta level of self-reinforcing industry. We were close. There was a time, as you probably remember, I mentioned Randy Adamczyk and Janet Zahn, of course, with the film world. Minneapolis was on the radar for Hollywood productions back in the 80s into the 90s. And for various reasons, the incentives, the focus kind of evaporated for that particular slice of the arts industry. Different issues probably for every single different arts discipline. And then
now that I think of
it, I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, now that I think of it, one thing that comes to mind is that I recall that in the early aughts, there was Minneapolis suffered pretty heavy cuts to local government aid from the state level. I remember working with the library, we had layoffs for the first time in decades. You know, perhaps that had something to do, that must have impacted the rest of the city very, very severely as well. Maybe well, that had something to do with it.
That's a great insight. Yeah. So it's complex. It takes a complex perception to see the possibilities, but it also takes a certain collegiality, if you will, amongst all these sectors to move forward. And that was probably the one area that let us down. I will say this much. There's sort of, as in many communities, not just the arts world, but ethnic communities, you have it. There are a lot of class levels here. There are the upper levels, the middle levels, and the lower levels. Oh, we even had a think tank back in the day called the Minnesota Arts Forum, centered over at the Humphrey Center. And we created models for how to get this, first of all, what was going on in the arts, and then what areas maybe needed buttressing, if you will. And we mapped out where the fissures were and the stress points as to how to develop into not a monolithic, but a dynamic, all-embracing arts world that could have really put Minneapolis, and by extension the Twin Cities, on the map. Most people didn't speak that language, and some of them that did speak the language were very territorial, let's just put it that way.
Okay. You moved on to Inside Minneapolis and then On Cue. You said these are volunteer efforts on your part. Were they also your creations? Were these proposals that you made for the city to produce?
Short answer again is yes. Having been a long member, originally as the arts guy at the MCDA, as a long member of Q, I was and I served as chair for a bit. I really enjoyed the topic of the urban environment, which is what Q is all about. And so, not unrelated to the arts world, but distinctly different. And then Inside Minneapolis grew out of my background with the development agency, which had to do, of course, with urban development. Some people kind of conflated those. And I said, well, no, there's a real distinction between the urban environment, the built and the green, the natural environment, and then the urban development of projects and districts and corridors and all that sort of thing.
They didn't last nearly as long as artifacts. Why were they short-lived?
Well, it gets back to the minefields I keep alluding to. It was around that point where, and I'd say this humbly, but I think the success of both artifacts leading into Inside Minneapolis and leading into On Cue was starting to catch people's attention, and they kind of wanted to take them over. And well, it didn't work.
Okay. What came afterwards for you? You were already out of the city as an employee, and these projects came to an end, and you were doing other things.
Well, and not to be too vague, I mostly retreated into my own personal inner life, my intellectual life, my political life, social activism, artistic endeavors, if you will, and most recently a spiritual life. Not that I hadn't always had elements of that in my youth, but not having a 9-to-5 job or whatever the cliche is, I was able to go into those areas and kind of develop each one of those a little more broadly. In terms of employment, essentially when I left the city, that was it for my working life.
Right. Phil, anything else you'd like to add? Those are all the questions that I had.
Let me see if I've got anything here. You've covered so much. Oh, I do want to acknowledge someone you know, Jeff Schneider. You and I wouldn't be talking if it hadn't been for Jeff's appreciation of the Artifacts show. And I think he brought the show and me to your attention. And he was, when I first met him, he was in the city budget office. I think he got shifted over into something similar, but I'm not sure what his final title was. But kudos to Jeff for seeing something that, again, humbly I say, I think is of value for future generations to look back at a snapshot of the arts in Minneapolis at the end of the 20th century.
Yeah, Jeff is the one that hooked us up with Casey now almost over 10 years ago that got the ball rolling with the many donated materials we've received from the city. And in fact, now of late, we've been receiving things from his wife, Mary Catherine, because of course,
sure,
as you know, she was very heavily involved in arts organizations early on with her work with photography and other things like that.
And what was it? The one at some of the early theaters in town. Yeah, Mary Catherine and I have spent hours because we were on we knew each other, but we were kind of on parallel tracks back in the 70s in terms of sort of the nascent art scene, at least of our generation. There's certainly been an art scene before us, and there continues, and that's very heartening to see the arts carrying on, perhaps thriving, at least in some of the disciplines. So yeah, I guess that might be the last thing I would want to shut out. I mean, doing a show like Artifacts or Inside Minneapolis on Cue doesn't happen alone. It's not a one-person show. Although if you don't show up to do the interviews, that's telling.
Right. Well, thank you very much for spending time with me on this today, Phill. And again, I think these are very this is very valuable information for the show, and also for people who worked with the city on the promotion and interest in the arts. As I said, this interview has been recorded, and I will send you a copy of it with the transcript. I will give you this caution that when it goes online, with your approval, of course, it will just be audio, and the reason is that this Microsoft Teams, the video is really fairly poor. You're rather fuzzy, and it's also very choppy. Sometimes your face freezes up, or your mouth doesn't follow the dialogue, and the sound quality is good, but the video is not quite there. I mean, I'm happy to share the video with you, but we just haven't had good results with that. Trying to do it online.
I'm a little surprised to hear that, because you're crystal clear, and from my vantage, you've been great on camera and audio and all that.
Maybe because I'm on the library end, and maybe it works better here. But yeah,
okay.
it's you'll see what I mean when I share it with you. It just it would generally work better. But at any rate, and also I will, before I send it to you, I'll edit out the obvious parts, like the pause that we had when I had to talk to the automobile repair people or anything else like that. So it may be maybe a couple weeks before I get this back to you. But again, I want you, if you will, take the time to review it and let me know if there's any parts that you want to be removed, and that we would do that and get your final approval on it before making anything public.
Fair enough. I should point out, I have not received any mail from you with the permission form.
Oh, okay.
We checked again.
I'm trying to remember when we transacted that. That was just last week, wasn't it?
Yeah, early last week or the week before.
Yeah, it might not have gotten out to you. I mean, I put those down in the mailroom, and then I think they get routed out to the Ridgedale Library before they're actually stamped and processed. So yeah, I mean, if you don't get anything by the end of the week, let me know, and I'll get it out to you a different way.
Two quick questions.
Sure.
It occurred to me because it was on my desk. Would a resume be useful to you of mine?
It could be. We would what we would probably do with something like that, particularly since we already have photographs of you online, so there's already kind of a biographical connection with you, and then obviously all of the you're in all the metadata for every Artifacts on Cue and Inside Minneapolis show, and then this interview, we'd probably put it in our biography file. Okay. There might already be a file on you for all I know, but you know, again, they used to clip up to the year 2000, and there might have been newspaper articles about you, who knows, but that's probably where that would go. So certainly we could, we'd be happy to receive that.
I'd probably just send you a hard copy if that's all right.
Sure.
And then on a personal note, I know you're not a fanatic about baseball, but a few years back I printed up a copy of Blogs. It's a 16-page little booklet about baseball when I took a class at the university. And I thought you might enjoy that personally. So if you'd like, I could just send that along.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, baseball is kind of really in a previous life for me. I still enjoy the game itself. I don't really follow it anymore, but yeah, I was back in the 90s. I think I shared with you, I was pretty heavily involved in the Society for American Baseball Research. But
yeah, you're an old saber rattler.
Exactly. So yeah, no, I'd be happy to look at that.
We have some folks in common. Yeah, this was a course on baseball in film and literature, taught over at the university, and the prof always wanted us to write a blog about what we read or what we saw. So I'll send that along just for personal kicks, whatever.
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, I guess if you could tuck those into the envelope if the form I sent you ever arrives.
Oh, sure.
So,
one way or another.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
one last question. Who's that over your shoulder? Is that Poe, Edgar Allan Poe on the wall?
Oh, the picture? No, that's Emil Oberhofer, the first conductor of the Minneapolis Symphony Orchestra.
Oh, sure. I rarely see pictures.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah,
well, thank you for this. Thanks for your good follow-up and your interest in this whole project.
Great. Well, take care, Phil, and we'll be in touch about this interview.
Sounds good.
All right.
Have a good time in Texas.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.